and welcome to this review of my NuPhy or NuPhy, still not sure how to pronounce that, Air60HE keyboard. This was sent in by NuPhy. I've previously reviewed their Field 75HE keyboard, which was a pretty wacky looking Hall effect model, and now they're back with this one, and right off the bat you can probably tell what's so unique about this. It's an actual low profile Hall effect keyboard, which is a channel first. Hall effect keyboards have their roots in some of the very first computer keyboards ever made, and they remained popular for a while, but they started to lose traction during the 80s and they were virtually completely absent from the 90s onwards, until the Hall effect resurfaced again some 8 years ago, and it's slowly but steadily been regaining ground, and now it's even come to low profile keyboards. By the way, completely unscripted, but I know some of you will want to see the height difference between these two keyboards, and here you go. So this keyboard obviously has a somewhat striking look with its grey and purple colour scheme and smattering of translucent wacky keycaps. It also has an aluminium chassis, though because of the low profile and small size of the keyboard, there's very little actual aluminium in it. It weighs only 530 grams as well, or in imperial units, a small fries with cheese and ketchup, which is not a lot, so it's definitely made with portability in mind. Now, I must admit I'm not a fan of small form factors myself. A full size is fine, and a TKL is not ideal, but workable. But when you get around the 70% mark and keyboards start leaving off F keys, I think it's no longer a useful product personally. And then when you shrink it down even further to something like this, and they start leaving off arrow keys, it actually gets quite annoying to me, which is why I had the Keychron Q0 Max on standby again, where I programmed an arrow cluster into the keys here, along with a few high-use keys like print, screen, and tilde to make life bearable again. That said, of course, this is very much a personal preference, and I know loads of people that like this or want even smaller, and obviously, you do you. Now, the arrow key thing requires a little bit more elaboration. You might think that to use the arrow keys programmed onto the FN layer, you use FN plus WASD, especially as that's what's printed on the keycaps, but it's actually not. Those output nav commands like page up and page down and home and end instead, which really had me puzzled. I thought there was something malfunctioning in the keyboard or something, until I found out that the arrow keys are actually located as a layer on the question mark, alt, menu, and control keys. And I kinda get it, because it allows you to do FN plus those keys with one hand, but that's really cramped, I think, and it's also unintuitive. I think it would have been better if they'd gone for WASD instead. Now, of course, this isn't intended for general usage. This is purposely marketed as a gaming keyboard, which, by the way, kind of makes it more puzzling that it doesn't have dedicated arrow keys on it, I think. But it's light, very thin, 18.8mm at its thickest, and it has very low latency, so you can take it with you when you go to game somewhere. Of course, the marketing revolves entirely around speed. It claims to be the world's fastest gaming keyboard, with some sort of test that supposedly shows this. Now, I can't really speak to how much sense this actually makes, because it uses a bunch of compensation factors for intrinsic delay, etc. So I'm not exactly sure how they arrived at these numbers, but I'm pretty sure other manufacturers will do it differently and arrive at different numbers, proving their keyboard is in fact the fastest. For example, for supposedly the world's fastest keyboard, it seems weird that they picked USB as an interface rather than PS2. Anyway, suffice it to say that it's got adjustable actuation, so you can stick the actuation point all the way at the top at 0.1mm if you want, and it's got 8000 Hz polling rate, rapid trigger function, dynamic keystrokes, which is where it registers a second type of key press at a different depth in the throw, and what they call hyper tap, which is where the key registers when the key moves back up as well. So basically it's got the works. I've been gaming for over 30 years, and for me this sort of thing is complete overkill, but I've talked to plenty of people in the rhythm game community, and they say it provides a definite noticeable benefit to them, so if that's what you need, then this has it. What I personally am more interested in is the key feel and sound, though for low profile switches, sound is already kind of inherently going to be difficult, and they added a bunch of foam and other dampening material to the chassis, so key feel it is then, especially smoothness, which is what Hall effect switches are best at. Now, generally, even the best and most lavishly lubed contact-based switches don't feel as good contactless switches in my experience. Even ones that people tell me are really, really good, I find they generally can't quite compete. Now, it's definitely fine in the smoothness department, but one thing I didn't think about beforehand, but which was immediately noticeable when I started using it, is that with a shorter throw switch like this, the difference in smoothness is much harder to gauge, because when you bottom out on a key press, the resulting shock completely paralyzes any sort of sensations your fingers are feeling, and as the bottom out is much faster on a shorter throw key, the smoothness window is less of an event on the keyboard like this. So, in other words, smoothness is harder to feel, let alone enjoy, on these switches. Of course, that doesn't mean it's all for nothing. Hall effect has more advantages than just smoothness, of course, such as increased reliability, decreased latency, and adjustable actuation, which is nice, though I still think that the added value of Hall effect is not as great on these switches as they are on full travel ones. As for the rest of the board, it's hot swappable and it has RGB, somewhat decent RGB actually, but I can't really attest to the build quality, or more specifically the toughness of the build. The aluminium part of the chassis is just a small wraparound bit here really, the back panel is just plastic, and the whole thing flexes quite a lot for such a small keyboard, so I don't dare say how well this would hold up to constantly being lugged around. You know, maybe it does, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's done in such a way that I can't immediately tell, oh yeah, this is not going to fall apart. The keycaps are pretty thick inverse die sub PBT, but the legends aren't as sharp as they could be, to be honest. The translucent keycaps with the writing on it that looks like the alchemist language from Chants of Sennaar appeared to me to be silk-screened ABS or something like that, but I could be wrong there. It is somewhat affordable at $120, which isn't that expensive for a Hall effect board, though it being small and low profile, obviously you're not getting a lot of keyboard for that, so to speak. That said, this is a rather specific piece of hardware with a very clear niche, being highly portable and yet with a very strong gaming aspect to it. I'm not sure how many alternatives you really have if this is the kind of thing you're looking for, so like I said, I think this just fills a very specific niche. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.